I don't know if I should even be putting this down on paper. Writing it feels like feeding it. But maybe that's just my paranoia talking, or maybe it's exactly what it wants. It started 2 weeks ago on a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning that's neither memorable nor worth mentioning, except that it led to everything else. I had taken a short vacation from my job as a paramedic to help my cousin Thomas clean out his late mother's old house before it went on the market. The place out on the edge of Crenshaw Lake, a body of water that always smelled faintly of algae and iron. The house was old, paint flaking, dock warped, attic filled with decades of forgotten things. Thomas wasn't the sentimental type. He wanted the place cleared fast, so we spent most of our time shoving dusty boxes into a dumpster outside. But in the corner of the basement, behind a rotting wicker chair, I saw something that made me stop. It was a leather-bound journal, swollen, waterlogged, and dripping faintly onto the cement floor. The cover was almost black, though I could tell it had once been dark brown. The pages bulged out unevenly, and the whole thing stank faintly of lake water. "You find something?" Thomas called from the stairs. "Just a book," I said. I don't know why I didn't show it to him. Something in me felt possessive, or maybe it was just curiosity. I slipped it into my backpack while he was hauling a broken lamp outside. That night, back at my apartment, I set the journal on the kitchen counter. The leather was soft and sticky to the touch, like it hadn't completely dried even though it wasn't actively wet anymore. I expected the pages to be blank or ruined, but when I opened it, I saw writing. The ink was dark brown, almost black, and the handwriting was small and tight, slanted like someone had written it in a hurry. The first page said, July 2nd, 1973, the lake doesn't give back what it takes. The boy will not be found. That was it. No signature, no context. I turned to the next page, blank. The rest of the journal, as far as I could tell, was empty. It didn't feel special, just strange. I assumed it was someone's discarded creative writing project or some weird private diary. Still, I kept it. Maybe because I've always been the type to hold onto odd things. Keys that open no locks. Postcard from strangers. Thrift store Polaroids. 2 days later, I came home from grocery shopping and noticed something I couldn't explain. The journal was sitting in the middle of my coffee table. I hadn't put it there. I was sure I'd left it on the kitchen counter. More than that, it was open. A page that had been blank before now had writing on it. July 5th, 1973, it's louder tonight. Nails on the hull. Scratching to get in. My stomach tightened. I told myself maybe I'd missed the page before, that the ink had just been faint until it dried. But the handwriting looked freshly pressed into the paper, the strokes sharp and slightly raised as if the ink hadn't been there for long. I closed the journal, shoved it into my backpack, and told myself I'd forget about it. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of dripping water. Not from my sink, not from the bathroom. It was coming from the foot of my bed. I sat up and froze. The journal was there, resting on my blanket. A small puddle was forming beneath it, soaking into the sheets. My first instinct was to blame Thomas, some prank for not telling him about finding it, but my apartment door had been locked all night. I touched the cover. It was wet again, as if it had just been pulled from the lake. And when I opened it, there was another new entry. July 7th, 1973, I saw her face below the water tonight. Eyes open, hair floating like weeds. I didn't sleep much after that. Over the next few days, I tried leaving the journal in different places, inside a kitchen drawer, under my bed, even locked in my car trunk, but it would reappear somewhere else. always damp, always smelling faintly of algae and rust, and always with a new page written. Some nights I'd wake up to the sound of water dripping onto the floor, and I'd find it leaning against my bedroom wall, open to a fresh line of text. The handwriting never changed, and the dates all followed the summer of 1973. The entries described things I didn't understand: figures walking along the lake at night, shapes moving under the surface, scratching sounds against the hull of a boat. But last night's entry was different. I didn't want to touch it again. The journal sat on my desk, where I had left it the night before, bloated from moisture, its pages puffed out like diseased skin. I swear I had shut my bedroom door before going to bed, but when I woke up, the door was open, just wide enough that the dim hallway light could spill in, illuminating the outline of that thing on my desk. I told myself it was paranoia. I told myself it was probably just old paper naturally expanding as it dried, and maybe my own curiosity was what was making me think it was. Wrong. But the first thing I noticed when I walked over was that the journal was warm. Not in a fresh from the radiator way. No, it was like holding the palm of someone else's hand. There was a faint, almost imperceptible pulse under the cover. And there were new words. The page from last night, the one that had ended mid-sentence, had continued, except the ink wasn't the same faded brown as before. This was fresh, black, still glistening faintly as though the last stroke had been made moments ago. The water never stops, even when you close the drain, even when you block your ears. It finds a way in, and when you hear your name through it, you must not answer. She listens. She always listens. I didn't write this, and it hadn't been there before I went to sleep. I closed the book fast, as if I would stop it from being real. My heart was hammering in my throat, the air in my room suddenly stifling. I told myself to throw it away, get rid of it before I spiraled any further into whatever this was. But when I tried, the journal wouldn't fit into the garbage can. Not because it was too big, because when I lowered it in, it hit the rim before it should have. Like there was an invisible barrier that kept it from crossing into the bin. The impact made a sound, like wet cloth slapping against tile. I dropped it on the floor and backed away. That night, I dreamed about water again. I was in my shower, but the tiles were old, cracked, and stained brown with rust. The water that gushed from the shower head was not clear. It was a dark, murky brown, and it reeked of iron and decay. The drain was making noises again, not the usual glug of water going down, but a muffled voice. Something trying to push up. And then I saw fingers. Thin, pale fingers pushing through the metal grate. The nails were swollen and white, like they had been underwater for too long. When I woke up, my floor was wet. There were drips, actual wet footprints, leading from the direction of the desk to the bathroom, and the journal was back on my bed. The cover was still damp when I picked it up, but it opened easily, almost like it wanted me to read. The next entry was longer. Do not look at her reflection. The mirror lies. The water shows the truth. She can only speak through what flows. She is patient, and she's already inside your walls. I threw the journal across the room. It landed near my closet, splashing faintly on impact. I didn't even check. I just left my apartment, still in my pajamas, and walked around the block for nearly an hour. When I came back, the journal was on my kitchen table. A ring of water had formed beneath it, and there was a single new sentence scrawled across the inside cover in a hurried, almost desperate hand. If you stop reading, she will come faster. That night, I started to hear drips in the walls. Not in the pipes, in the walls of my bedroom. and every time I closed my eyes, I heard the faintest, muffled whispering coming from inside the drywall, as though water was carrying words straight to my ears. I didn't sleep well after the incident with the new ink. It felt like my body rested, but my mind stayed half awake, listening. I left the journal in the kitchen again, on top of the drying rack, partly out of fear that it would do something while I slept. Every sound in the apartment made me jolt, a faint hum in the pipes, a creak from the hallway outside, even the wind scratching the balcony door. By morning, the sky outside was the dull gray of dishwater, and the whole apartment smelled faintly like wet earth. Not the fresh kind after rain. This was swampy, almost rotten. I opened the windows to air it out, but the smell stayed. I didn't touch the journal until after breakfast. I wanted to convince myself the pages would still be as I'd left them. The eerie, water-wrinkled paper, the impossible new lines in a hand I didn't recognize. I almost believed they would be. But when I sat down with my coffee and opened it, my stomach dropped. 2 new pages had been filled. I flipped through in disbelief. My own handwriting was nowhere on them. They were written in that same thin, hurried scrawl, uneven like the words had been scratched into the paper during a storm. The ink wasn't quite black. It was darker now, almost brownish, like dried blood diluted with water. The words were different this time. Not a diary entry. Not a direct voice speaking to me. It read more like a memory. The girl kept crying for her mother. She's still under there, still tapping at the wood. It told me not to answer, not to look, but I saw her fingers. Pale and swollen, nails blue. I think she's been there a long time. I stopped reading. My brain snagged on one particular word. Tapping. That night before last, when I'd gone to bed, I could have sworn I heard a faint noise from the kitchen. I chalked it up to the fridge motor. But now, I read the page again, slowly. The idea of a little girl under there was vague enough to dismiss as fiction, but fiction inside a journal that shouldn't be able to write itself felt more like a threat. I noticed something else this time. The bottom of the page was water-stained, freshly, damp, as though the journal had been dipped in a shallow puddle. But the sink was dry, my hands were dry, and I hadn't spilled anything. That afternoon, I made a choice I probably shouldn't have. I decided to test it. I left the journal open to the last filled page, set it in the middle of the table, and turned on my phone camera. I propped the phone up against a coffee mug so it would record for hours, then left the apartment entirely. No peeking. No interference. When I got back around dusk, the journal was exactly where I'd left it, except now it was closed. Not flipped over by a draft, but closed neatly, as if someone had intentionally shut it. My phone was still recording. My hand was shaking when I replayed the footage. The first 2 hours were uneventful. Around the 3-hour mark, the camera audio picked up something faint, like the muffled sound of liquid pouring, though I'd left no taps on. Then, 10 minutes later, the footage caught it. The journal's pages began to move. Not like a draft. They didn't flutter, they turned. Slowly, one after another, until the last page was showing. Then, right there on camera, the pen I'd left across the table rolled over by itself and stood upright, on its tip before falling against the open page. The video didn't catch any new writing, but I felt my scalp prickle. Something in the room had moved things. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined those pale, swollen fingers from the entry, scraping at the underside of something I couldn't see. The smell of damp earth grew stronger, seeping into the bedroom now. By morning, I felt wired and sick, but I went straight to the journal. And, sure enough, there was a brand new page waiting. I heard her again last night. She's getting louder. Someone has to pull her out before she swallows more water. But they say if you pull her out, she'll open her eyes, and that's when she starts speaking in your voice. The last 3 words made my skin crawl. Speaking in your voice. Was that supposed to be a warning? Or was it a confession? I slammed the journal shut, shoved it into a drawer, and locked it. I told myself I wouldn't touch it again. But even now, as I'm writing this down, I can hear something faint, coming from the bathroom. A sound like the lightest nails, dragging against the metal of the shower drain. And I think it's in my voice. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I didn't try, but because the house itself didn't seem to allow it. Every time my eyelids grew heavy, the faint scritch of the journal's pen would stir me back awake, like a mouse gnawing somewhere in the walls. But it wasn't coming from the desk where I'd left the journal this time. No, the sound came from beneath me, from under the bed. I kept telling myself I wouldn't check, that I'd stay perfectly still and let whatever was happening play out without my interference. But by 3:47 a.m., I cracked. I leaned over the side, hard hammering, and pulled up the hanging sheet. There was nothing under the bed, nothing but the warped, damp floorboards that seemed darker than usual, as if the water stains had grown overnight. Still, the scritching continued. It was louder down there, like it was coming from below the floor. I decided to grab the journal from my desk to check if it had been writing again, but the desk was empty. The journal was gone. I followed the sound downstairs. It led me to the hallway at the back of the house, the one that had the locked door I'd never been able to open. That was where the sound stopped, not slowly, but suddenly, like someone had lifted a needle off a record. It should have been a relief. It wasn't. Because the drip I'd heard on my first night was back, only faster, heavier. I don't know what made me do it, but I pressed my ear to the door. The wood was cold, wet, and then I heard it, not the pen scratching anymore, but something like a voice, a whisper, muffled by layers of wooden space, but just sharp enough for me to make out. It's your turn to write now. I stumbled back so fast I hit the wall opposite the door. When I blinked, there was water pooling from underneath the locked door, dark, murky water. I stepped forward, reaching for the knob despite myself. It turned this time. The smell hit me first. Rotting wood. Rotting. Something else. The air was so thick with dampness, I could almost drink it. The small stairwell beyond the door sloped downward, like a basement, but the wood was slick and black with mold. My bare feet stuck to it as I descended. At the bottom was a room I'd never known existed. The only light came from the dim spill of the hallway above. My eyes adjusted slowly, revealing walls lined with shelves and every shelf crammed with journals. Hundreds of them, some so waterlogged they had bloated into shapeless lumps. Others pristine, like they'd just been placed there. And right in the middle of the room was my journal, sitting open on a pedestal. Its pages were flipping by themselves, though there was no breeze. The wet ink shimmered in the darkness. I approached slowly, breath shallow, until the moving pages stopped on one I hadn't seen before. It wasn't dated. Instead, across the top in jagged handwriting, it read, "Entry by the living," and below it was my handwriting. It described in detail the moment I would die, where I'd be standing, what I'd be wearing, the exact time down to the second. It said I would drown in my own house, that the water would come not from above, but from within the walls, that I'd hear a knocking first, like fingernails on metal, followed by whispers through the pipes. The entry ended with, "Do not resist." All the others wrote too. The moment I read that line, I looked up and realized the shelves weren't just shelves. They were the same dark wood as the floor, warped and swollen, and wet footprints trailed between them. Someone else had been here recently, or something. I didn't remember leaving the room, only that I was suddenly on the stairs again, my feet splashing in water that now reached my ankles. I bolted for the main floor, but the water followed faster, sloshing against the steps. By the time I reached the living room, it was already shin deep. I looked up at the ceiling, expecting to see it pouring from a burst pipe or a hole, but there was nothing. The water was rising from the floor itself, bubbling up through the cracks in the warped boards. And beneath the bubbling, I could hear it, the tapping, like fingernails on the underside of the floorboards. Like something was trying to get in. I did what any sane person would do. I called the landlord. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. When he finally answered, his voice was calm. Too calm. "You opened the door, didn't you?" I froze. "What?" "You opened the crawl space. You looked at the others. You read it. That's why it's coming faster for you now." The water was already at my knees. My breathing turned shallow. "What are you talking about? What is this?" There was a pause on his end. Then he said something I still hear in my head when I close my eyes. "You're writing your last page." The water was at my waist. It hadn't come from any pipe or crack in the walls. It was alive, flowing and shifting as though it had intent. Every time I tried to lift my feet, the floorboards resisted, sucking them down. The journal sat on the table, open, pages fluttering violently despite the still air. I didn't know if I was awake or still dreaming. I only knew I had to act. I reached for it, fingers trembling. As soon as I touched the cover, it slammed open to a blank page. But words were already appearing, letters forming like ink in water. "You cannot escape. You are the next writer." The letters glistened wetly, like they were bleeding into the page. And then, smaller words appeared beneath, in a script identical to mine. "I am trying to stop it. I am trying to stop it. I do not want this." My own words. But I hadn't written them. I hadn't even touched this page. I dropped the journal. It slid across the waterlogged floor on its own, stopping at the edge of the living room where the wall met the ceiling. The dripping sound was louder than ever. Knock, knock, knock. Like fingernails under wood, pacing, syncing with my heartbeat. I turned toward the mirror in the hallway, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't me. It was a pale figure, almost completely submerged in water, pressing itself against the glass from inside the reflection. Its hands were long and thin, nails curling like claws, pushing against the mirror as if it could step through. Its mouth opened silently, and I swear I felt the journal whispering the same words I heard in my head. "Write or drown." I staggered back. My reflection, my body, was still in the hallway. But the figure in the mirror mimicked me perfectly, except its eyes were completely black. I grabbed the journal again. The pages were filling faster now, words racing across them. They told me things I couldn't possibly know, where I'd hidden my keys, the exact steps I took to get to this apartment, the nights I dreamed of water, but thought it was just nightmares. And then the entries started speaking to me. "Do you see her yet? The one under the floor? She is smiling. She has been waiting for your words. The water remembers. The water feels. The water hungers." The next page detailed my death. Not a general death this time. Specific. My name, my apartment, even my bed, where I was standing as the water would claim me. I felt the temperature drop. My breath formed clouds in the air as the water climbed past my chest. The tapping beneath the floorboards became louder, faster, knocking in perfect rhythm with my heart. Then I heard voices. Not in the journal, not in a mirror, but from the walls themselves. Write the last page. Finish it before it finishes you. She is here. She is waiting. The journal leapt from the table into my hands. It was as though it had wings. I couldn't let it go. My own hands were shaking too violently, but the words were forming anyway, almost as if the pen had a mind of its own. I don't want to die. The pen scrawled faster. I am here. The letters swam in water, rising off the page, dripping into the floorboards, joining the flooding current. I tried to scream, but water filled my throat before the sound could escape. My lungs burned. My eyes stung. Then the floor cracked beneath me. Splintered wood rose like jagged teeth. My body plunged into the cold abyss. I thrashed, trying to grab anything, but the journal followed me into the water. Its pages opened and closed like a mouth, the writing now a flood I couldn't control. All who write here stay here forever. All who drown here live forever. She is feeding. She is writing. She is you. The water filled my ears, then my eyes. The tapping became fingernails on skin, on me, crawling up my legs, my arms, my chest. I felt myself dissolving into the water. My reflection in the mirror's black eyes met mine one last time. Write or drown, it whispered. I didn't write. I drowned. The apartment was silent the next morning. The water had receded, leaving only damp floors and warped furniture. The journal lay open on the table. On the last page, in ink that glistened like wet obsidian, were my final words. I tried to stop it. I could not. She is here. She is waiting for the next writer. And beneath that, freshly appearing, in letters I didn't write, your turn is coming. She remembers everything. She will not wait. The journal waits on the table even now. I haven't touched it since, but I can hear the faintest scritching when I walk past. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear tapping, like fingernails on wet wood, following the rhythm of my heartbeat. It never stops, and I know it will never stop.